What is the scariest thing you've ever seen while driving at night? A freaking owl standing on the carcass of a large buck in the mountains at 3:05 am. All you see as you approach are two glowing red orbs. Then slowly it becomes huge dark form standing on the edge of the road with eyes of fire. Then you get close enough and this massive freaking owl just gives you the death stare as you go past. You realize it was just a large butt owl standing on the remains of fresh roadkill. Freaked me out for the rest of the dark part of the drive. Owls are angry sky cats with talons. Can be real sweet, but frick if they aren't terrifying sometimes. Someone I knew locally came across a Jeep that had just crashed into the ditch on a highway at night. Flipped on its top, wheels still turning kind of thing. He was the first on scene, so called 911 and ran down into the ditch. The driver, who was badly mangled, had been tossed from the car and was dying. This guy held him and the driver died in his arms. The weirdest part of it all was that he found out the next day that it was his cousin, but he hadn't been able to recognize him. I hope the guy who died was comforted by knowing a family member was with him. Driving down a 2-lane divided highway, I came up to a couple semis and went into the left lane to pass. I did a shoulder check to get back into the right lane when I saw headlights in front of me. In my lane, the car was going the wrong way. I managed to swerve into the ditch. Felt like I was mere centimeters from death. Thought my wife's scream would be the last thing I ever hear, and I never want to hear it again. The semis I passed all pulled to the shoulder to come check on us. Didn't see the car anywhere. I think they just kept going. Had to pull into a gas station after and collect myself. Actually very nice of those semis to check on you guys. I was following a grey Toyota Tundra in a massive blizzard through Montana on McDonald Pass. He was going pretty quick most of the way but must have been unfamiliar with how steep the final few miles are. He got away from me as I slowed down to about 35. Not 5 minutes later I passed his tire marks in the fresh snow that went off the side of the mountain. Pulled over and looked down to see his truck upside down and on fire about 300 yards down. Called 911. He didn't die but was burnt up pretty bad. Sad and scary, and don't go 50 in the snow just because you have a truck or 4WD. Holy crap. 300 yard fall and he lived. That's amazing. I had just finished driving for Uber and was driving down the access road to my home around 3 am when I saw a body lying completely lifeless next to one of those motorized scooters. I pulled over and flagged down his buddies who were drunk and kept going without realizing their friend was lying on the ground. Ambulance arrived and took the kid away, but I never came to find out if he made it. FCK those scooters, man. I was on I-70 in Colorado going towards Utah. Pulled over at a gas station at 8 PM. Fueling up I notice a couple of attractive women pumping gas. On the other side of the pump was the man in his late 40s. Just staring at these young women without notice of anything else going on around him. I walk inside to go grab some food for the next few hours of driving. When I come out I see both the younger women's car and the older man's truck are gone. I decided to hang out at the gas station for the next hour to catch a little sleep before hitting the road again. After driving for a few hours, I was speeding heavy. I pull over at yet another gas station. The young women are there getting gas and eating some food on a picnic table. Looked like they had been there for a while. I didn't see any sign of the man in the truck but can't say I was looking very hard for it. Well, here is where it got creepy as heck. Can't say I didn't stare at them a bit. I mean, they were good looking women. As I am watching them leave I see in the next parking lot over some headlights turn on and it's the same man as before. He leaves when the women leave once again. Okay, that's a bit weird but could just be a coincidence as there weren't many places to pull over. I leave a few minutes later and catch up to them. Now this guy is riding their butt with his high beams on. I decided to slow down and stay a distance behind the truck. 10 minutes or so later the women pull over once again to most likely get this guy off their butt. With a sign of relief the truck keeps going and I continue on my way. About 1 mile down the road the guy just pulls off to the side of the highway. So I pull off a mile or so down the road again. Sure enough the women drive by and the guy is still following them. At this point we are out in the middle of nowhere and too many coincidences have happened. I called the cops to alert them and about 15 minutes the cops pulled the guy over. I could have just seen too many horror movies that started like this and overreacted, but you never know. Better safe than sorry. It was a good call to alert the police. Even if it was a coincidence, no harm would have been done to the guy, and if it wasn't, you might have just saved those 2 girls' lives. Not me but a friend. After dropping me off at my house around 2 AM, my friend calls me and tells me to pick my doors. He said he saw a man standing in the middle of the road and that as he passed him the man kept staring through him. Not at him really, but like there was something behind him in his back seat. He also said he could barely make out anything about the man other than his large eyes and trench coat. What really terrified me is that this happened on a street that only my family lives on and no one would have been out that night. Also, we're a solid 1.5 miles from the nearest neighbor. Freaked me the heck out. I slammed the brakes once because I saw deer in my peripheral vision. Upon closer inspection, it was a mounted deer head on a stick in the middle of the woods. Slammed the gas after I realized that might have been a setup by game wardens to catch illegal poachers at night. I used to deliver pizza and often had deliveries right at midnight when we closed. One time, late at night, I'm driving back to the store through a small neighborhood. Up ahead I see something. It's perfectly spherical, bright shiny thing, just hovering about 6 feet off the ground, not moving at all. I pull up very slowly. Still doesn't move. Still can't comprehend what I'm looking at. Just this shiny hovering orbing the road at midnight. At this point my curiosity has overridden my fear. I'm the guy in the horror movie who dies first because I just gotta know. Either I die or I get a cool story, right? So I hop out of the car and slowly walk up to it. I'm right in front of it and still can't understand what I'm seeing. So I reach out and touch it. It's a balloon. One of those foil birthday balloons with the streetlights shining on it, making it look weird out of context in the middle of the night on an empty road. This is my favorite response because it feels like exactly how I would react. This is a story about something that was really scary at the time, but kind of funny in retrospect. Once I was driving through an unfamiliar stretch of desert and mountains on my way to a campground in Utah. The sun had set and it was pitch black outside. We hadn't seen a town for a long time, which was fine because we didn't need fuel, but it's worth noting here that before it had gotten dark, the last several exits that had been marked on the map didn't appear to have any people at them. There weren't many other cars on the road that we could see, but eventually this vehicle came up behind me, clearly going much faster than I was. He passed me on the left and as he went around me I could see that it was a pickup truck with a lift kit. The pickup got back into my lane in front of me. He stayed there for a few seconds, then suddenly swerved to the left and slammed on his brakes. He then cut back over into my lane so he was behind me and switched on his brights. He followed me like this for some time, getting right on my rear and flashing his brights repeatedly. I started getting nervous at this bizarre and aggressive behavior. I told my wife to help me find a populated exit. The road began to spiral down a steep mountainous slope. What followed next was a progression of increasingly alarming road signs that seemed like they belonged in a Looney Tunes cartoon where a character is about to careen off a cliff. These signs said things like, "Watch for wildlife, frequent wildlife crossing next 20 miles, watch for ice, watch for falling rock," etc. None of them would have been scary on their own, or maybe in the daylight, but at night, in a situation where I was starting to panic, they seemed alarming and it seemed like they were ridiculously increasing in severity. At one point, a sign popped up that said road damage. Since I was in panic mode, I remember exclaiming, "Why don't they just fix the damage instead of putting up a sign?" Eventually, we found a town with lots of lights and I promptly exited. I was terrified the guy would follow us, but he went on past me. I pulled into a gas station and that's when I figured what I probably should have realized a long time before. I had my brights on. I like a story with a good payout at the end. Scariest and funniest at the same time. I was working at a restaurant as a cook. We did full menu till 11 PM, then apps and burgers till 1 AM. I tended to pull the solo night shift because I would walk out the door at 1:05 AM and the kitchen was stocked, clean, and perfect. It was a long night. Stupid fuck kept sending back food orders after 1 AM. I didn't leave till 2 AM. 30-minute drive home, and I was exceptionally tired. I lived in the boonies of Wisconsin at the time, a good 5 kilometers outside of town, which was 500 people, 2 churches, and 9 bars. I hit the little 24/7 truck stop just at the edge of that town for some munchies and smokes, and made the final trek home. Encountering deer was not uncommon out there, so I was going slow, when what appeared before me, to my tired eyes, was a monster. It had a huge, round body, this crazy long neck, a pointy head, and only 2 legs, right in the middle of the road. Scared the ever-loving frick out of me in that state. Thankfully, it stood there for a second. Brain ray engaged. It's an ostrich. Okay, not a monster. Hell, just an. What the frick is an ostrich doing wandering around in central Wisconsin? I looked at it looked at me. I blinked. Nope, still there. Pretty sure it's real. Finally, it trundled off into the forest. What? I grabbed my cell phone and called the tiny little police station in town. Non-emergency number. So, I'm really tired, so please laugh at me and tell me to go home and sleep and ignore the call. But I'm pretty sure I just saw an ostrich on Highway XX just outside $ town. She started laughing hysterically, then assured me that, no, I'm not hallucinating. There's an ostrich and emu farm on the other side of town. Guy raises them for the kitsch places in town for meat. Some drunk driver felt that turns are for pussies, went up, over the berm, through the fence, and through most of the barn. There's still 4 animals, including the one I just spotted, unaccounted for. Where are you exactly, and which way did it go so we can round it up? I gave her the info, finished the last few miles home, and died in bed. Wild night, man. This is the best one. You reacted exactly the same way I would have. A dead, butchered horse laying in the road. Someone had completely skinned and butchered a horse, took the choice pieces of meat, and just dumped it on the highway. I almost crashed into it. WTF. I was fetching someone from his workplace. Had to go through some fields, and some parts of the road were dark. I saw a thin, long object, wiggling at an upright position at the side of the road in front of me. Totally freaked me out. I thought I was finally experiencing something extraordinary. As I got closer I realized it was a tail of a cow. It must have escaped from some field and was hanging around at the side of the road. The cow itself was black, the tail slightly lighter in color. That's why I only saw the tail moving first without seeing the whole cow first. Oh my, yes dear, that's just old Betty's bottom, not a ghost worm. A lonely abandoned shack with a bunch of arrows pointing to it, saying come in. Bruh, either these types of traps only exist in cartoons. 3 AM on a lonely road and I was the passenger. An old man only wearing a bra, panties and high heels was casually walking down the road. My friend who was driving didn't believe me and went back around. Sure enough, he saw him and we were like WTF. I dropped my GF of the night we saw the Mothman Prophecies. It wasn't a super scary movie, but it had some scares. I take the interstate home. On the way, there is a curve where there aren't any lights, just a dark stretch of interstate. As I came around the bend, there was a guy in a black trench coat walking along the side of the road. As it was about 3 AM, I guess I started him. So, when my headlights hit him, he whipped around and I swear he stared me right in the eyes. My heart jumped into my throat. The whole event lasted maybe 2 seconds tops, but it had my heart racing. Not paranormal, but definitely scary for me. I picture him whipping around like that old dramatic chipmunk meme. A hitchhiker almost leaping out in front of my car on a dark forest road late at night. The woman literally popped out of nowhere. Had to drift into the oncoming lane. Luckily there was no one else and painted median there. Read a police report that she ended up getting hit minutes after I drove by. She was intoxicated and running from the police. Pretty freaking creepy. I hope she's alright. I can't imagine what the driver that hit her was thinking. Comma had a similar thing, but it was a suicide attempt. He put his shirt over his head so he couldn't see and jumped out in front of our car. We missed him by inches. Also we were young, dumb and drunk. We would have been jailed for years I'm sure. I got off on my exit, and the whole road was covered in blood. I put on my brights and saw a bisected body of a large animal. It just made me so sad. This is like a weekly occurrence on MI highways. I was driving on a near empty freeway at midnight when I saw a weird flickering light on the freeway. It was super dark and barely any lights besides headlights, so I slowed down a bit and merged a lane over. As I passed I got a good look and it was a car absolutely destroyed and on fire. I was a little shocked and ended up driving a bit past it before I really saw what it was, and by the time I thought about pulling over it was already far behind me and a cop sped past me on the other side, so I knew they were aware of what happened. I was driving on the expressway around 2 AM and a semi hit a car and it went into the median. The car basically folded into itself and was beyond smashed. I can't imagine that person survived. It was incredibly sad and terrifying to see. I was driving down the highway during the middle of the afternoon and watched a guy get out of a minivan parked on the side of the road and run out in front of an 18-wheeler. He got hit and died, I assume on impact. Crap freaking sucked. I went back to the office and asked if I could go home early. I was driving home late one night and was driving on a dark stretch of the highway. Suddenly a body was in front of me. I tried to swerve out of the way but it was too late. My bumper was hanging on the ground. The guy died, and I went to a nearby gas station not knowing what to do. Was 18. When the tow truck pulled my car up onto it, there were a bunch of blood and guts on the bottom. I couldn't get that image out of my head. Apparently a drunk driver with 5 DWIs had hit a guy on the motorcycle prior. For years after I had serious depression and thought about it every night before sleep. That's awful. I can't imagine that. So sorry. Long stretch of road, not so much as a driveway for 100 miles in either direction. Late at night in this middle of nowhere road, there was a car on the side of the road that was on fire. And I don't mean like an engine fire, I mean completely engulfed in flames. Not a single person or another car anywhere around it. I hadn't even driven past a car in over an hour. Might have just been some hicks having fun. I was a very young woman driving home after clubbing, about 2 AM through Hollywood. I was pulling up to a stop sign on Cahuenga, about 3 blocks from Hollywood Boulevard, when a bunch of guys begin to casually stroll onto the crosswalk, coming from both sides. I hit the gas and ran the stop sign without even thinking. They cursed and ran after me, but those boys were ready to jack me. My instincts took over before I even realized what was happening. Yo, that is some serious crap. Driving down country highways late at night and seeing coyotes just standing on the side of the road can be pretty unnerving. Yeah, but coyotes are little b. Unless they are starving it's no big deal. And if they are starving they're gonna be malnourished and weak. A lot of people that drive for a living or have done balls to the wall cross-country drives can tell you about the running shadows. First time I saw them I was on the tail end of 12 straight hours of driving. I was driving through the middle of nowhere, in the desert, at night. Very little light from the sky, no man-made lights even on the horizon. Just a pitiful cone from my truck's headlamp, and being in the middle of the desert it pretty much only lights up the road ahead. Nothing above ground level to catch the light. As I'm barreling along I start to see shadowy figures running alongside my truck out of the corners of my eyes, on 2 legs and 4. All I can think about is the creepy stories you read online about crap that lives out in the desert, or the Asian ghost stories where if you don't acknowledge the spirit it can't harm you. So I've got my eyes glued to the road, refusing to let them flicker off to the side. I rolled my windows up and cranked up the volume on my radio. Drove like that for probably an hour and a half until they slowly petered out roughly 15 minutes outside of a little one-light town. I've had people try to carjack me, people try to rob me after I pull over to render aid, people jump out at me on twisty mountain road, you name it, but nothing matching that level of fear the first time I saw them. Felt like my spine was rippling like a ribbon in a wind trying to jump clear out of my back and hide under the seat. Sleep deprivation mixed with sensory deprivation does some strange things. Was vacationing in Newfoundland, and we ended up leaving dinner kind of late en route to our stop for the evening. Was hoping to make it before dusk, but had to drive about 30 minutes in the twilight. Nothing scarier than coming around a corner in the road and seeing a moose standing on the shoulder right next to the car, and realizing it almost ended your life. Oh, I've got the perfect thing. Driving home one night from my fiance's house, normal night on the Florida highway. It's pretty dark, not too many lights, cruising at around 75 headed over a slight hill. just big enough that you can't see the other side. Get to the top and start making my way down the hill, and very suddenly in my headlight view I get a giant construction vehicle with all of its lights turned off and parked in the left lane of the highway. I really, seriously, pray to God that no one hit that parked construction vehicle. It was one of the ones that digs up dirt, I think. On the highway that day, I very narrowly avoided smacking right into the back of that thing. I don't know how the Cherokee I was driving at the time handled the sharp turn I made into the right lane to avoid the vehicle. Needless to say, I was very nearly dead. Immediately called Florida Highway Patrol and told them about it. I hope they got to it before someone got hurt, and I really hope someone at that construction company lost their job, because they could have killed multiple people. Common normal night on the Florida highway. Terrifying. A body in the ditch. Thought it was a deer as I approached, and then my brain was like, deer don't wear boots. I was shaking as I did the U-turn to make sure the person was alive. They were just drunk and some people stopped as well and emergency was called. I was so shaken up by it. That's nice of you to go back and see if they're okay. A lot of people just drive by nowadays. I drove taxi during the night shift, and among many crazy and terrifying things, I saw a toddler, 2-3 years. It was about 1 AM and I was driving in a very wooded part of our town, just after dropping a customer off, and in the middle of the road was this baby just sitting in the dark. I stopped my cab and turned on my flashers. I proceeded to walk up to the kid and he just started bawling. I tried to comfort him, but me being in disbelief that a baby with no one around was just sitting there, all I could say was it's cool bro. I picked him up and he started crying frantically. I would too if a stranger came and grabbed me. I put him in the passenger seat and looked for the nearest driveway. It ended up being about 100 yards down the street. I pulled up into what I hoped was his house, and there was maybe 6 or 7 teenagers drinking in the garage. I couldn't see from the road because all the houses had long dirt driveways. When I pulled up they acted as if I wasn't even there until I said, "Hey, this your kid?" After a few watts they came over to the cab and said, "Aiden, where did you go?" Like the baby just goes for midnight strolls. Not a thank you or goodbye or anything. They just took the baby in the house and continued drinking and laughing. As I pulled out I felt as if I should call the cops or something, but couldn't bring myself to do it. I'm still scared to this day that I'll be driving down a dark road and hit a baby. You really should have called the cops, bro. Not sure if this will count, but here we go. Back in my 20s I was putting myself through uni by working night shifts at a factory. Money was great, but between full-time work and full-time study I was constantly exhausted. Sleep got worse when I picked up a second job to make ends meet. Parents split up and dad went into depression, so he wasn't working, you see. Anyway, after months I kept falling asleep at the wheel on the way home from work just before dawn around 4 AM. One time as I was driving home all alone after work, I saw half a dozen crocodiles on the road. I swerved to avoid hitting them and almost crashed the car. I was terrified in the moment because they came out of nowhere and were huge, and I'd never seen crocodiles in real life before, let alone on a freeway. I pulled over the car and looked in my rearview mirror, but nothing was there. To this day I don't know if I dreamed those crocodiles or if they were a hallucination from sleep deprivation. Scariest thing I've ever seen, and I'm so thankful no one was on the road at the time too. I wouldn't doubt if you did hallucinate from sleep deprivation. I know I've been there before, but usually I get auditory hallucinations. Those made late night study sessions super fun. Either way, I hope you're getting more rest now. At a busy intersection, guy crashed into a pole next to me. He then immediately got out of the car and started running. No one was after him. I sat there at the red light wondering if this guy planted a car bomb. Probably had a suspended license or a stolen vehicle and was trying to get away before the cops came. I was in college at the time and it was late at night. The day before Thanksgiving, I believe, or at least around that time. I had class earlier in the day and packed, then headed off on the 10-hour drive to the western edge of Nebraska. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning and I was in the final stretch of the trip. Driving down a totally deserted highway, only 2 lanes with no shoulders, so the speed limit was 55. I was tired and having not seen anyone for at least an hour I kept kicking up my speed up to 80. I was flying down the road. As I crested a hill I spotted headlight atop a couple hills down. I didn't think much of it, reduced my speed a bit and got Reed to turn off the brights over the next hill, but I didn't see any more headlights. I figured they must have turned off down a gravel road. Could have been for any number of reasons. They lived that way, maybe coming home after a night at the bar and didn't want to risk getting pulled over on the highway. But at first I didn't think it was weird, until boom, a black car hauled butt past me in the direction that car had been heading, with their lights off. I still wasn't too freaked out until I saw brake lights and then headlights behind me. I freaking hauled butt. I called my grandparents as soon as I noticed the person was gaining on me. I gave them a heads up and my grandpa said he'd be at the end of their 1/2 mile driveway with his shotgun and rifle waiting for me. I still had another 10 miles to go until the nearest town, then about 20 miles on gravel to get to their house. I knew the roads reasonably well, but not well enough to get off the main drag and zigzag across country roads. I was doing 90 and so was this person, but kept their distance. I got to the town and just hauled butt through it. I didn't stop for the 2 stop signs or the 1 stop light. At that point I was hoping to get pulled over. As I got about a mile from my grandparents' house, my grandpa turned on his headlights and spotlight on his truck and was driving towards me. That's when the person turned back around. I always wonder WTF they were doing. Like, were they just freaking with me? Did they want something? I'll never know. Thank God for Rifle Grandpa. I saw a large car hauler, hit a deer. The deer got pulled between the double axles of the tractor and rolled there for a short time before finally finishing being run over. It was horrible. It was over 10 years ago, and the image is still clear in my mind. Me and some friends were going out one night. We're driving down a pretty big city street with about 2 lanes on each side, 45 miles per hour speed limit. This dude was riding a bike against traffic. My friend tried to swerve and the guy swerved the same direction as us. He gets hit and does a faceplant right into the windshield on the passenger side where I was sitting. He flips over the car and is just lying in the middle of the road. Don't know if the guy died, but it didn't look good. They landed a helicopter in the middle of the road and took him to the hospital. Witnesses stopped and waited with us, verifying that it wasn't our fault, and cops let us go on our way. Crazy night. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.